Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition for the week, where we go over theoretical, big picture thinking, conceptual ideas coming out of lean principles and our manufacturing businesses. I am Devin Bedoni of Lichen Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing.
And let's rock our weekly quote.
If a process is not striving toward a challenge, it will tend to slip back. From Toyota Kata. This jumped out to me from our quotes list this week because I've been noticing backslides in myself of just being like, yes, this is how I should do it, but we've been so busy.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm just not gonna do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I'm not sure. I probably should have. I don't know. It's very hard to say.
Yeah.
This week has been interesting. I've really been thinking a lot about like when improvements fit in and whether it's always like, it just feels like we're tremendously understaffed or something.
Yeah.
Because I don't want improving things to distract from doing the important stuff for the business.
Yep.
And if you zoom out, you could say like releasing new products is making major improvements to the whole business. Right? Which it theoretically is.
Sure. Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the upsides of continuous improvement are very long term. And so it is always easy to go like, you know what, today we're too busy.
Mm-hmm.
And so like those things feel very much in conflict in a funny way.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking about this quite a bit as well. And, especially in the context of moving and new employee and rethinking a lot of stuff. I think there's it's curious to just sort of like think about the backsliding, and like I think often when we think of backsliding, what we really mean, it's not so much, sometimes things truly do degrade.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what it is often is that a system wasn't fully baked, and then it just sort of like gels in that state and stops moving forward. And sometimes and then as things in that system start to break and people just adapt instead of improving, I think that's where kind of like the degradation comes from. We've been dealing with this a lot with like tool management stuff, contemplating it, and all these places where we've broken the system, and instead of taking opportunities to improve, just sort of like adapted.
That's the feeling that makes me like, it's so uncomfortable in the moment because you shouldn't.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like, well, I think I should.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It's weird. It's kind of like when you come home every day and maybe put some mail on like the table in your entryway, and you're like, I'll deal with that. And then like 3 months go by and you're like, how did this giant pile of mail get here?
But also,
and who's going to deal with this?
I think the feeling to me is like when you're putting it down, you should just deal with it and not just set it down.
Yeah.
If you're like, I'm headed somewhere, or I need to do this other thing really now.
Right.
And you shouldn't, and then you do anyway.
Yeah.
And the thing is, from a time management perspective, I'm not sure that it's a bad thing. Like, it can be a good choice, but it is indicative of a bad system.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like, the fact is there's no system to manage the mail, and that's why it's a struggle.
Yeah.
And there's anyway, but it's an uncomfortable feeling. Like for me, I was putting away some tools. We dropped a product, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sort of. It hasn't.
I know. Does everybody else know?
Well, no. So the launch is in a few days here. We did like a pre-launch to just our mailing list. And it was much more successful than I was anticipating, which is nice. I worked for 28 hours straight.
You have been hyping it for like 2 years. So
I know, but the whole time I was like, I don't want to get ahead of myself and then build it up in my head as like, this is going to be great. And then it's a bit of a flop. And I feel like emotionally that would just be hard.
Sure. But it went the other way.
It went the other way, which it's great. We've just been so behind that like not exactly behind. It's more like our automation wasn't running, which meant we had to tend the mill manually. And then imagining shipping a lot of these things, I was like, okay, well, we'll do it a bit and then it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got some new tools in and I walked over to the machine to put them back in the drawer and realized I had forgotten the Kanban card. And I was like, I'm just putting them in the drawer. Like, I will deal with that later because I really need to get this stuff working.
Uh-huh.
And anyway, I don't know. You know, good call, bad call? Probably a bad call.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Have you gone back and gotten the cards?
Yes. Yes.
Well, so.
But still, I mean, you know.
Sure.
And maybe the breakdown was that we don't actually have a receiving area that has the Kanbans laid out. And so it's not really part of a process. It's sort of like you bring stuff in, you perch the package. Like our shop is so tight.
Yeah.
Not that that's an excuse, really, I would say.
Yeah.
We just haven't considered that as a process of incoming packages, which now that I'm saying that, like, that is something we do very regularly.
Right, yeah. We have a similar sort of like...
It's totally ad hoc.
Yeah, we have like a halfway system, and which is terrible. I
mean,
it's better than no system, I guess. Like it used to be when I had my first employee that like I just had to deal with everything because I was the only one who knew what anything was in the boxes or where it might go. You know, and now we have like a place that packages go where UPS can drop them off.
Nice.
And then what happens from there is a little bit vague. And then once things are actually unpacked, like there is a place where we put tools to be sorted and put away.
Oh, nice.
But whose responsibility that is and when it happens and precisely what the kind of criteria are for when you use an existing Kanban versus make a new one, whatever, is still in need of a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it's better. It is better than it was.
Yeah, that's something.
But in the context of like striving, yeah, it has just sort of like settled in. And I think about it as like, it'd be very easy, like conceptually, for all these systems to become like the house of a hoarder, where you're just like walking around these piles, and you're like, oh well, I know
that is a great visual.
Yeah, like don't touch that one; it might fall over.
Right. Yeah, and we know where those paths are. That is a great analogy, like visual map of what happens as you build up these big piles of waste and bad systems. So I was listening to Toyota Kata, and they were talking about that Toyota views no waste or no problem is too small to address. And I think that's sort of where I struggle with the reading, with implementing it. Is like, is that true for me? Like I have such big problems and such a small workforce, essentially.
I got 99 problems and a small one ain't one.
I mean, so I don't know, like if I just went into the shop and stopped everything every time I experienced any problem, which I could, I just think realistically that would mean that I wouldn't get anything done that people are paying me to do. Like there's like years of work, and then that's assuming doing years of work without interacting with your customer is sort of assuming that you're on the right track. So like you can't do that. Never mind the cash flow.
Yeah, never mind the practical limitations.
It's just like not realistic. And so I find, and I'm sure they have an answer for this. Right? But like I don't know what that answer is. I know what my answer is, which is kind of like ignore the teetering pile and go like, yes, we will handle that at some point, but right now that's not a priority.
Yeah. I think that's fine, to be honest.
It's fine. It makes me nervous to not have a like a, not a rubric, but like some sort of
prioritization system.
I don't even need it to be a system. I want someone to say to me, here's how to think about it.
You want a pass? Are you asking for like a hall pass?
No, I want like that would be nice. Don't get me wrong. No, I don't feel like I have a concrete way of figuring out what is and is not worthwhile, because there's a few, and probably the answer is there is not a simple answer, right?
No.
Because I also feel like sometimes okay, Sam was out last week.
Yeah.
And I found it so frustrating working in the shop because I didn't have any time to make really improvements that weren't like critical path. We're launching this product. Right. And it was just so frustrating with like these things that are just like annoying. And I was like, oh, I have a good idea. And then to not be able to actually do it, I just found like really, really frustrating.
I feel like I think you do more improvements than most.
Yeah.
I think like that's the rest of us always, like every day.
Yeah. No, I feel that for sure. But just being able to do none. My point being that sometimes those small ones are just very satisfying.
Sure. Yeah. But then the question is like the catharsis, is it actually moving the business forward?
Exactly. Right. And often no.
Yeah.
And often you're actually improving a thing that is part of a bad system. And so the whole thing should get thrown out.
Yeah. I don't say I have an answer to this. I think what I've been coming to is like, especially at this phase of like early phase where again, I feel like we're like going from like maybe crawling to just learning how to walk in this process metaphorically. I think, like there's some big things you have to figure out. Like when you're learning how to walk, you have to learn how to stand.
Yeah.
Before you can like refine like your stride running. And I think it's very okay at this stage to be like what I'm coming to in my business is like, okay, we have like a couple key bottlenecks that are drastic and large. And maybe this is a little different for you because
no, I think what you're getting to is the crux of the problem, which is that I don't have a good sense of what those big bottlenecks are. And if I did, I could just laser focus on those a little more. I
mean, I think because you started the type of production that you do was like ripe for refinement early on. Yeah. So I think you got to refine a lot of the visible things. And I think right now you're having to dig into some of the things that are a little harder to pick apart and view.
For sure.
And the big picture aspects of the business, such as launching a product, which you didn't sleep or you worked for 28 hours straight.
Yeah. Was in there from 5 p.m. till whatever, 8 p.m. the next night or 9 or whatever.
Can squarely say I have never done that.
I don't think I'd ever done that. Yeah.
So like, I don't know. What I'm coming to my business is like, we need programming capacity.
Right.
And we're wasting like metric shitloads of time setting machines up because we're searching for things.
Interesting.
And like
what types of things? Like
tools.
Okay.
Mostly tools. Like
tools and tool holders? What kind of tools? Allen keys?
No, like end mills in a specific holder.
Okay, gotcha.
And I'm blowing that a little bit out of proportion. Like it's not the worst in the world.
I mean, you're making money, but that doesn't mean there's not. I was just talking about this in our paint department. Only about, I'd say 10% of the time is paint landing on a part, and the rest is waste. And so that's not to be hard on myself. That's right. But it is true.
Right. You're painting things that people want to buy. And at the end of the day, you're most hopefully in the black. Yeah. And similarly, we are mostly in the black and making parts that, we rarely have customers complain, and they seem to be coming back. Yeah. But also, like, everyone in the shop is very aware that these key aspects of the system are slowing us down. And so I think it's kind of easy to be like, well, we could definitely 3D print some doodads, and there will be 3D printed doodads as part of this thing. But it's like, we got some big fish to fry. We got to learn how to walk.
Yeah, so maybe this is a good moment to bring up something that really struck me from my reading this week was the idea in Toyota Kata. They talked about, like, at Toyota, they view a problem as not being... I'm forgetting if I mentioned this before we started recording. Anyway, you don't fully understand the problem until a solution is clear. You don't fully understand the problem. Yeah. And that at Toyota, they spend a lot more time and there's a lot more emphasis on on understanding a problem than there is on countermeasures. And that was striking to me because I just feel like it's a great litmus test of like, I can now self-monitor better knowing that.
Sure.
Going like, okay, it's not clear. What does that mean? That means I need to go see things.
Right.
I can't just sit here contemplating. Like I need to.
Yeah. That or break it down further.
Yeah. Right. And like pick apart one piece that I understand. Like I have a hypothesis about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing I've been taking away from the Toyota Kata book is that like, it's all a bit for naught if you can't sort of teach your people or get your people on board with this way of thinking.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like, yeah,
Right.
like we're discovering, like we only have so much bandwidth and we're busy doing things in the business. It's not like we can't just like go around improving everything, and things
Although
will,
we dream we can.
and things will backslide and degrade. So really that like, if you were to only do one thing, it would just be like practicing this thought process and kind of like letting people go.
That's a great point. Yes. So in there, he also says like the most useful information in that book are these 5 questions, which I thought I'd share.
Yeah. And I think we went over this like 3 or 4 weeks ago, but
I think we did.
We should do it again.
This is my 3rd time reading the book. And every time I'm like, this is amazing. This sentence particularly. Anyway, so what is the target condition? What is the actual condition now? What obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching the target condition? Which ones are you addressing now? That's sort of one question.
Mm-hmm.
What is your next step? What do you expect from that step? And then when can we go and see what we have learned from taking that step? All of this is useful. I mean, all of this is great. I think one thing that jumped out to me as a great like cultural piece is the 3rd question. What obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching the target condition? I think you put the quote in maybe a couple weeks back of like, be hard on the process and
soft on the operators.
This is very much putting the onus on the process.
Yeah.
Which I really like, because I was just talking to Sam today about like, we used to time production more frequently, and that is really seen as like Big Brother eye in the sky shit, you know? Like, let's time your production. And I was just saying to him, like, that is the optics of like, why are you slow today, right? Like, you have to work harder.
Yeah.
But really, it gives you a really good jumping off point of going like, okay, let's say our target condition is, or not even target condition. Let's just say it normally takes us this amount of time. Today it took 10 minutes longer. What happened?
Yeah.
Maybe you went to the bathroom, which is something that people do, right? And we need to account for that and be better about that. Maybe a roll of webbing fell on the floor. And so then if we see recurring things that are slowing us down, it just lets you look at the process and say, okay, what's our target condition here?
Yeah.
And so I think it also, for me, leads to much more creative thinking. Getting back to like, I was thinking about paint. How can I cut time in half? Which feels like a tall order. It feels like that perfect sweet spot to me of like a challenge that is not immediately obvious but is achievable.
Right.
Like, I am confident I could pull it off. Am I confident I can will pull it off? No, but I'm confident I can, and in the pursuit of that, I am very confident I will have some easy, cheap wins.
Yeah.
Right? Like, some of it might be like, okay, buy a paint mixing apparatus for $50,000, and it's like, yeah, right, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's a great place to start, in my opinion.
It is. Yeah, it's super critical. And like, as we've talked about, it's basically the A3 process outlined.
Yeah.
But in quick. Like, it's very interesting reading further into that book, you know, that a lot of these are like, this should be a 5-minute conversation kind of a thing.
Right.
And that the A3 process can also be something that evolves over weeks while going through the PDCA cycle. But that you should be able to kind of like boil this down to a 5-10 minute conversation.
What do you mean conversation?
Those 5 questions.
Yeah.
That like tackling some small issue should be something that you can address a bunch of these things in 5 or 10 minutes and be like, what's our target condition? What's the current status? how can we address this, and when, or what was the fifth one? But basically, like, what can we do, and when can we go see a result?
Yeah.
And like, in a perfect world, you're doing these like super small little things that where you go through that cycle 5-10 minutes, go check something out, propose a small change.
Yeah.
I think again that's sort of like aimed at very, like, relatively speaking, stable and mature processes. And like, one thing that I've been kind of coming to, especially at this phase, is like I got super fired up about this like 3 or 4 weeks ago when we were talking about it a bunch.
Right.
And then we did a bunch of A3 work together as a group and just generated this massive list of things to tackle. And all of it was pretty important. And
interesting.
And we don't really have that much time to do the like countermeasures, go and see part. And so now we're kind of in this point where it's like, well, it's not much use, at least not on new subjects. Maybe we should be diving into this more on small aspects of the things we're trying to tackle, which I think we are, just not necessarily in a structured way. But when you're trying to tackle these like very large, or relatively speaking, large structural changes, like reorganizing our entire tool management system,
right,
that takes a fair amount of like actual labor. And so we're finding like, okay, we're kind of like setting some of this aside until we can actually like test and go and see what the results were.
Right.
Not to say we aren't implementing pieces of
I think what I see is that oftentimes people create big problems and refuse to chunk them. And that means your PDCA loop is really long and really expensive, and the chances that you'll get to the end and go like, oh, that was not quite right is high. And this is where, like, in Toyota Kata, they were talking about an assembly stand that they called in a special favor to have built, and the production team did it over the weekend as a favor, and then they put it on the floor, and in putting it on the floor, they realized they needed to change it because they actually changed some of the production flow. Yeah. And then they had to take it back to them and go like, hey, can you make modifications? And he was like, what we should have done is said, okay, this is going to take 3 weeks to build these tables. What can we do now to sort of test some of these ideas? So like in hearing about your tool system, yes, it will take a long time. So what could we run like a 5-minute game where we have a different label, or imagine actually walking through it? And it's so easy to write those off and go like, let's we have a lot of work to do. I mean, I do the same thing.
We are doing that as well.
I
maybe actually painting a little bit of a darker picture than in the reality.
No, I mean, I think we all are. Okay, let me speak for myself. I know I am tempted to skip those steps, and every time I don't skip them, I'm happy about it. But it's so easy to just go like, that's a waste of time. Let's just get the thing.
Yeah. I think maybe the difference that I'm trying to elucidate here, or like bring to light, is I think in a more mature, stable process. Yeah. There's the like nut runner example in that book. I mean, like, we're stripping these studs. Why are we stripping these studs? Oh, one operator is using the nut runner differently. Right. Let's alter the standardized work on how we use the nut runner.
And a nut runner, for the uninformed.
Sure, it's like a power drill, but it's made to put nuts on a stud or screws into a hole.
So it's like a drill.
Yeah, effectively.
It's a way more expensive drill
with torque settings and all that fancy stuff.
That actually works.
Anyway, so like in that system, there's like a lot of variables, but most of them are pretty stable. Right. And I think when we try and do these kind of like big structural changes, all of a sudden you have like no aspects of it are stable, and you're changing things across all the different variables, and it can feel extremely chaotic in that interim period.
Do you think that's a good system then? Because like I sort of wonder if we should have more stable processes, and if we should focus on, and this is, Toyota would say yes probably, but sure, maybe not, on like, without standardized work there is no improvement concept.
I'm thinking to my own example. I think it can be challenging when you have like a lot of interlinked stuff where you're like, okay, we're going to change this system. So now we're altering all of our tool tags. Okay, so our tool tags have now a new ID number. Well, if we do that, then the existing tool tags don't relate to the tool bins. So now we also have to re-ID all the tool bins. And it's just like things like that start to tie together into, like, you're like, okay, I guess we kind of have to at least get all of these systems over a certain threshold in order to like roll out something that can function.
Yeah, I wonder, could you switch it over to like just do your taps or just do your drill bits or
That's
something
kind of what we done. Yeah, okay, I mean, we like, so to not to get too into the weeds. Yeah, we renamed the tool library. I'm realizing also I'm just impatient, so we're trying to do too many things at once, maybe. But we renamed the tool library. So we did do that part. Okay. We did it in a way that it can still relate to some of our existing stuff. Yeah. And then we started to reorganize the drill drawer. We started with that because we figured that would be less chaotic. Whereas like, like I'm talking, like you don't want to get halfway through reorganizing your end mills in a whole new scheme and then like have to go back to work and not be able to find anything. Right. So we've put that off for a little while. Yeah. Sorry, where are we going with that? Oh yeah, we are chunking it out. Yeah. But it's still like a bunch of things midstream. Yeah. I mean, that's cool that you have clarity on which aspects of the business are the big fish, right? I hope I'm right. No, for sure you hope you're right, but I'm just saying like having that clarity I think solves some of the problems I'm feeling. Yeah. Where I'm like, do I improve this little thing, which is indicative of like our total system is quite good. Uh-huh. Right? And now it just needs some refinement, which is probably not exactly the case. Uh-huh. Or, yeah, I guess getting back to that concept of like if the solution is not obvious, you don't understand the problem. I think I probably just don't understand like the problem. The big picture of the business. Uh-huh. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Like on a deep level of like, okay, here are the big things. The limiting factors to the growth of the business, effectively. Yeah. Or the thinking profit. This through, like you were sort of saying, when I launched, my processes were ripe for like very classic process refinement, automation, whatever the thing is. I think in a different way, what I'm doing is a little challenging in that the market can't give you feedback on stuff you haven't launched. Yeah. And so it's kind of like, I can tell you what the big bottlenecks are for our current production. Sure. But not necessarily what are the big bottlenecks to getting where we want to be in 5 or 10 years. Yeah. The growth of the business or the profitability of the business. Like you don't have great visibility into that right now. Or maybe I would if I spent a lot of time contemplating and like gaming that out or thinking hard. Every time I do financial projections, it's very illuminating, even though all the information that's in a spreadsheet came out of my head. So technically, theoretically, I should be able to just have those insights, but I don't know. Like I heard a great example, a quote of like someone who writes a book. He was saying like, having written a book, the act of writing, like you're learning. Right. You're not just writing so other people can learn. Right. You're not just like taking it out of your head and like sticking it on a page. It's evolving as you go. And it clarifies your thinking on the various topics. That makes sense. Writing a book is like mind-boggling to me that anybody can do it. So much. I've tried a couple times. Really? Yeah. And clearly it was very challenging. It was challenging. I mean, it's still in process, I guess. We'll see if it ever comes out. But it was super worthwhile. And every time I go back and kind of think on it more, it's on prototyping. And so it's sort of like, and then trying to think about how to explain it, it really clarifies your own thinking. One of the things, I started writing this in high school. One of the things was don't glue anything until you have to. And since like writing that, I was like it pops into my head whenever I'm going to make something permanent. And I'm like, I don't have to secure this yet. Like I'm just jumping the gun, right? I can come back and glue this later. Interesting. Yeah, so like definitely That's
Definitely
wild that you
something.
had that clarity of purpose in high school.
I don't know if it was a clarity of purpose. I think it was just fun to think about or something.
Well, it's still more or less what you're doing. So.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think, yeah, it's like, in theory, we have more, like, interaction with the market in a certain way.
I think you
But also
have
not.
product market fit pretty much. Once you start talking about adjacent industries or capacity, like capabilities in the shop, that's where
Yeah.
it gets a little tricky. Like you're sort of more scaling rather than
Yeah.
innovating. I mean, you are innovating in how you're doing things, but
Right.
not what it is. So when you get you have a lot of signal from the market currently.
Yeah.
We've like, hey, can you do this faster? And you're like, no, but I know why, and I'm trying to fix that.
Yeah. I mean, there is definitely the, like, we've been joking in the shop a lot about the mayonnaise thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh, is that your mayonnaise?
Yeah, that's I was just telling my brother about that yesterday.
But
We talked about that on the podcast, right?
Yeah,
Sir
yeah.
Kensington, yeah.
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 Where was I going with that? Oh, just like there's a real potential that like our current customers are not a good match in terms of like the kinds of parts they need made and the where our skill sets are and like our production, our specific capability.
Right.
And we don't know that. There's no way for us to know that without actively going and seeking out new customers. Or
it's really a trick.
Yeah. So on the one hand, I think, we do get direct feedback if we do things wrong.
Right.
And we get feedback in the sense that customers come back again when we do things right. But we don't get a good feedback about whether we are truly like, if we're truly making mayonnaise or if we're still making ketchup.
Yeah, this is the peak seeking issue, right?
Yeah.
You are in a particular vertical. You get feedback about how to improve, so how to move up that hill, how to move up that optimization hill. But there may be an adjacent hill that's higher.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get feedback that, hey, you guys should really go over here completely.
Right. And that hill might have a train to the top.
Yeah, like you just don't know. Yeah, it's very tough.
There's a saying that a friend of mine has, which is the work you take is the work you get. Right?
Yeah.
The underlying idea being that like it is, and I think this is common. This is a friend in the contracting world, like building houses. Like once you get known for doing a thing, and once you kind of like get in that lane,
I see. Like there's a feedback loop.
That's what you continue to get.
Right.
So you got to be careful about the work you take because it will tend to perpetuate into being the work that you continue to do.
Yeah.
So I'm wary of that for sure. There's also the option in my realm of being like, okay, we're getting a lot of this kind of work. Maybe we actually switch everything up internally because like we're not tied to a product or a process. Like we could, in a theoretical world, start, buy a machine and start taking on ultra large work pieces if we wanted to invest in that and like pursue that part of the market. Yeah. Which I guess isn't so different. You could potentially say like, I'm not going to make outdoor sports hardware anymore. All of a sudden, I'm going to do specifically safety rated for the lineman industry or something, and like make a pivot like that.
For sure.
I'm just off on a tangent now. Anyway,
no, it's I think it's very good to be very aware of what feedback you're actually getting. Right, because that's essentially what we're talking about, I guess. Is like understanding that we are running an experiment and the feedback we're getting from the market is only on the questions we're asking, kind of. Yeah. But it's rarely explicit.
And it can be hard to ask some of those questions.
It can be, but I think it's mostly because, again, we are very hesitant to do the go and see part of the work. Because, like, this gets back to sort of like prototype, like this is the realm of startups, and there's a lot of techniques, there's tons of books on them. It is very rare that people are actually practicing them, which is basically you could call a company and say, hey, we are a large 5-axis machine shop, right? We do this stuff. What work do you have work? And they might be like, absolutely, because your fear immediately is like, well, what if they say yes? Right. Right. And you can
for anybody who doesn't understand, we are not a large 5-axis machine shop.
Not yet. Unless you have a lot of work. Yeah. No. So most people won't do it. So it's similar to like if you're launching a product or thinking about launching a product, you don't actually have to make the product.
Yeah.
You can go be like, hey, we make this product. Do you want to buy them?
Yeah.
And everyone's pushback is like, well, what if they say yes? It's like, okay, have them write the check and then return the check. Right? You can do that. And then in 2 years, if you still, like, once you actually make it, go back to them and they'll be excited about it.
Right.
Like, there's no cost. It's so testable, but no one will actually do the legwork.
Yeah.
Very few people actually want to go do that legwork.
Well, and I think there is which is maybe not realistic, but I think there is a fear of offending the market, as it were. Or I think in the business to business world, like, those relationships can be hard to generate, or they can be hard to develop. So you definitely don't want to, like, get in over your head with a big...
Yeah, you have to do the classic, like, hello. Yeah, you can pretend to be someone else, right? You don't have to be like, this is...
True, yeah.
Anyway.
I hadn't actually thought of that. That was curious.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then you hear a real answer.
Yeah.
Anyway. This is not lean theory anymore. Well, it sort of is. This is going and seeing faster than you otherwise would.
Sure.
Like, a lot of people do really long experiments for, is my product going to have traction?
I thought the classic example of the Toyota executive driving all around the United States in a van.
Yeah. That is going and seeing.
Was, impressive. And I guess like a quintessential example of kind of what you're talking about here. Being like, not just like, do we design something we think is cool and then wait for the market to respond after we've already put in the work, but let's go see what people are using our product for now, talk to users, ask them what they want differently, and then make that thing specifically for them.
Yeah, I mean, I have some great examples of failures. So we developed this is a startup I did, developed a water filter, and it was very clever. And
if I may say so myself.
Well, it didn't make a good business. So clever only gets you so far. Comparing it to shipping in bottled water post-disaster, it's like, it was like 1,000 times lighter, like, whatever, 10,000 times cheaper. Like, I mean, it was orders of magnitude on every front. And we figured out production and all this stuff. And then we finally went to a conference and we asked, we talked to like some big buyers at different NGOs. And they're like, "Oh, that's super cool. Yeah, we deliver aid on a family basis, not an individual basis. So that probably wouldn't work for us, but it's a super cool idea."
So sorry, dive into that a little bit more.
Well, it was a water filter for one person, and they deliver aid on a per family basis, and so they just had zero interest in it, and we could have found that out a year in advance. But instead, we went and solved all these technical problems of how do you do this thing. And it was just fundamentally not what they were looking for.
Interesting.
Even though it was there were other problems with the industry. And besides that, like, it wasn't the only thing. But the point is, we completely failed to do the thing you're meant to do.
Sure. Which is like,
hey, this is a production piece you can buy that I made in the last hour.
Yeah.
Or photoshopped. Do you want to buy it? And they'd be like, no. Like, okay, I won't develop it then.
Yeah.
But there's the fear that they'd be like, yeah, we want 10,000. And then you're like, oh, well, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah. Curious.
Anyway.
It's kind of amazing. I was talking to a friend yesterday too about just purchasing material. I was trying to source something that we don't usually buy.
Okay.
So I texted a buddy and asked if they had a good source for this specific thing in the area, like local suppliers. And that just kind of got into a conversation about what they were using for which metals lately. They're using a different supplier for aluminum than we particularly do. And it kind of like, I was like, oh, interesting. We use this other one like all the time. And they were basically, they were like, on low quantities, that company wins. On high quantities, this company wins.
Good to know.
And also, just so interesting that like something so simple as pricing structure like has the very real potential to drive the success of a business.
Yes.
Right? Like likely they just are running a slightly different spreadsheet.
Interesting.
On how they break down pricing per bar.
Right.
And and we don't necessarily give them feedback. We just order or we do not.
Yeah.
So they don't really have a way to know.
Oh.
But I mean, I guess we could tell them. But it's interesting to think that like, we're not buying an insignificant amount of aluminum these days. That could all be going to a different company with a slight change in pricing structure and likely, or even just a discussion potentially. And likely, their margins are probably pretty similar. It's not like I don't think there's like huge gains to be made in aluminum flat bar these days, right? Like I think they're
pretty efficient market.
It's pretty optimized, and like they all are aware of where they're competing with each other.
Right.
So it was just so curious to be like, these little mismatches can have massive, massive implications, and trying to figure out how to find those is the tricky part.
For sure. This definitely plays into my my view that everyone needs to give more feedback, because people just don't hear your feedback. Like when you're in a restaurant and something is not very good and it's sort of like, don't say anything, it's embarrassing or something. It's like, no, I'm not like criticizing you. I'm just letting you know like what just happened to me is not good. Maybe you want to change it. Not for me, just in general.
Yeah.
Like people don't hear enough feedback. I actually was talking to an anodizer a while ago, and they gave me pricing, and then it was totally not going to work. So I just called them and I was like, hey, I was hoping for something closer to this. Like, what's the... And he was like, oh, like, first of all, thanks so much for calling, because most people just don't respond to our quotes. We can, if we do custom racking, like they probably quoted you on our standard racking, but if you're doing these quantities, we can talk about custom racking, and then our part density is way higher. And it went down nearly in half, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. We have very small parts, so I'm guessing the relative gains from their standard racks to like something custom were high, but it's just interesting. Yeah.
That's cool.
Give everyone more feedback.
Yeah.
They might hate you, but
yeah, it's a bummer being where we are. Like a lot of our decisions are driven just by who will deliver on the material front standpoint.
Yeah. Right.
And it's like there's no way that anybody, well, pretty much no like price break from another company is going to overcome the cost of sending a person to go get it and not be in the shop making things instead.
Right.
Plus paying them.
Yeah.
So we end up being kind of like bottlenecked into certain suppliers.
Interesting.
Or bottlenecked. That's not the right word.
Constrained or...
Yeah. Shoehorned.
Yeah, shoehorned.
Anyway, I feel like we're just kind of rambling on.
We are kind of rambling.
Any other topics you wanted to hit before we wrap up?
No, I think, definitely thinking a lot about what and when to improve things. It's been an ongoing struggle.
Yeah. Maybe we just all need to read the goal again. Not really.
I hate that book.
I strangely loved it.
A lot of people do. I don't know why.
I think I was
my gears.
I think I was starved for entertainment.
Yeah. Right after it in the audiobook, he has a great essay, which is
that part
the
was
book,
fantastic.
And I really like that.
Yeah.
So definitely pondering that. It's tough, and yes, my goal is to have more target conditions for the different aspects of the shop. Something I think we're gonna do a bit more of.
Interesting.
Like just challenges that are actually juicy and hard, instead of like, hey, move that. What if we moved that printer? Like it'll be more ergonomic, which is probably true, and we will probably continue to do that. But more generally, why are we doing that? Yeah. And
right, like a how can we pack and ship an order in under 3 minutes?
Right. Yeah. In fact, what does it normally take now?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, no clue.
Maybe I should.
Yeah. No, I think that's also how you get people excited. That's how I get excited. It can just feel like completely overwhelming to just be like, okay, we just have to get better because we suck.
Right.
Versus being like, that is a cool thing to be like, we're going to do this routinely in under a certain number of minutes.
Yeah. And it's especially exciting if it's hard, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of what drives a lot of sport, right? Like competition.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly we have some kind of deeply ingrained thing around competition because the amount of energy that people put into it and money and everything is just like, it's ungodly quantities. And so I guess figuring out how to tap into a little bit of that like fun, competitive nature is very helpful.
I mean, it's not surprising that it's a trait that would get selected for, given that life is a competition, like in a cosmic sense. It's a competition to exist.
Yeah.
I should say people who compete in the competition of existence exist. That's more.
Sure. Or
because cosmically,
creatures that compete, or people.
Even compounds. It's very analogous, right? Like the ones that are stable, self-perpetuating, and resistant to change.
Mm-hmm.
So, like water is a very common thing because it is self-perpetuating. I mean, it's not self-perpetuating, but it is,
stable.
Stable, exactly.
Interesting.
And is a common way for those elements to exist.
Yeah.
Whatever.
They're friendly.
On that
random note.
Thanks
everyone for coming along on the ride. And you can find me on the internet at likenprecision.com, on Instagram at lichen_MFG.
And you can find me at austeremanufacturing.com or austeremfg.com. Or austere_manufacturing on Instagram, and the podcast at Incremental CI.
And we have a Patreon, and we have 2 new patrons, Dan Stranahan, thanks buddy, and Jonas Enevoldsen Andresen. Hopefully I didn't butcher that too bad. Thank you so much for supporting the pod.
Absolutely. And we'll be back on Friday.
Talk to you soon.